Good evening to all of you. Welcome to this Wednesday night Bible study with the Pulaski Street Church of Christ, and hope you've had a good day. Certainly welcome those online that might be joining us also. We've got some updates on some prayer requests that you will no doubt find in your bulletin once it gets to you. We learned today that Kathy Atwell had a cyst removed from her cheek. The procedure went well, but as you might imagine, Kathy's in a lot of pain. Andy Lee is scheduled for surgery at Williamson Medical Center this Friday to repair his left rotator cuff. And so certainly want to be thinking about that and praying about that in terms of the procedure itself, but my guess is that he is maybe a little more worried about the aftermath, right? The recovery. So we'll pray for a tolerable recovery. Michael Mashburn is still in Vanderbilt UMC, but we're thankful to report that he is off the ventilator and that his condition at this point is improving. Linda Moore, the sister of Kathy Sisk, had lung cancer surgery yesterday at Centennial. The surgery went very well. Linda's going to remain hospitalized there for 2 or 3 more days. Lymph nodes have been sent for testing, but the doctor is in fact optimistic. And so as of right now, no further treatment is planned, and maybe it'll stay that way. We certainly hope that. Couple of sympathy notices. We extend Christian love and sympathy to the family of Sue Gamble. She was the sister-in-law of Ruth Goff. And we might also add that Sue was the best friend of Laverne Hammond, Tim's mama. And so there was a lot of reminiscing about those two yesterday at Loretta Memorial Chapel, where the funeral was held. We also want to extend Christian love and sympathy to the family of Michelle Allen. Michelle was a friend of Patsy Lee and Nina Busby. And that funeral was held today at Neal Funeral Home. There's obviously praying for that family. And then some of you might recall that Michelle's son, Ben Allen, was in a terrible car accident some time ago, and which left him paralyzed. And so there is obviously continued help that he'll need. A few reminders, ladies. You're invited to a bridal shower in honor of Lakin Robertson, the bride-elect of Josh Tainer, this coming Saturday, May 7th. It'll be from 10 o'clock until noon in the church building foyer. So not the fellowship building, but right out in the foyer there. The gift registries are Amazon and Target. So bridal shower for Lakin this Saturday at 10 in the foyer there. This coming Sunday, May 8th, which also happens to be Mother's Day, we will be meeting at 5:30 p.m. in the fellowship building for feast. Kevin is out of prison, he said. He was in jail with COVID, but he has been released and plans to have everything ready to go this Sunday. And then finally, there is a sign-up sheet on the bulletin board for the upcoming leadership workshop scheduled for Saturday, May the 21st. This is for elders and deacons and their wives, teachers, church leaders, those interested in becoming leaders in some capacity. Lunch will be served, so please sign up so that food can be arranged for that Saturday, May the 21st. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jeremy.
We are glad to have all of you here. A couple of other things. One, you might have heard, you might not have. Judah's got a Star Wars shirt. and it's awesome. He was excited about it, and I was too when I saw it. So does Isaiah. That's awesome. Yeah. Well, they both do. It's awesome. So, yeah, we got Star Wars shirts. We love Star Wars, right? In our house, we do. I don't think there's a Gargus wearing one tonight. The May 16th Breakfast Bible Study, again, KDI 1 will be bringing the sign-up sheet over after Bible class from the office. It will be in the fellowship building, and it is for lions and lambs and their parents. That will begin at 6:45 Monday, May the 16th. You will have until next Wednesday to sign up for that. I will be out of town next week, but I'll have somebody picking that sign-up sheet for me so that we will be able to know how many we will need to plan for our food. I get that that's not going to be convenient for everybody. With work schedules and everything like that, getting kids to school, you may have more than one school to drop off at and things of that nature. But for those of you that can be here, Monday, May the 16th in the fellowship building, that will be our last breakfast Bible study for this school year. We've had, this will be the fifth one that we've had. They've been very well attended. I did not have really, really high hopes for our attendance for those because it's 6:45 in the morning, and you know what teenage kid is going to want to wake up like an hour and 15 minutes earlier than normal to come eat breakfast? But we've had 15 or more of our teenagers at the last 3 of those, and it's just continued to grow. We've had over 20 at one of them, and so it's been great, and it's been exciting for me, and thankful for all of our teenagers that have made an effort to get there, and parents probably too that are maybe telling them, you got to get up, and parents that have brought them and dropped them off, and other teenagers that have helped give rides to neighbors and things like that. I really appreciate it. We'll have this one more. We will be studying Philippians chapter 4 for any of you that want to get a head start on that for May the 16th. Last Sunday morning, those of you that were here for Bible class studied about another one of Jesus' miracles. And in this particular miracle, Jesus raised someone from the dead. But who can tell me something about that person's parent? All right. Keegan. She was a widow. All right. Who can tell me something else about this widow? You got something? All right. Go ahead. He was her only son. Now, does that mean that this was her only child? Maybe, but we don't know for sure because it just says that he was her only son. Did you have another detail, Kingston? No, that was it. Yep. He took it. There's one other detail, that I'm thinking about, and it's where she's from. Anybody remember the name of the town that she was from? It's in Luke chapter 7. All right, so you got that one, Kingston? What is it? Nain. 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 So we've got this widow from Nain, and her only son has died. There's a large crowd that is gathered together, and Jesus, it tells us that he has a particular feeling that he directs toward this woman. And what is that feeling that he feels? Maybe somebody that hasn't answered one. What did Jesus feel toward the woman? It starts with a C. Do you know it? Sorry? You got it? No, somebody. Compassion, that's right. I wonder if somebody whispered that in your ear. But either way, that's awesome. So Jesus felt compassion. They stop it. He touches the open coffin, and he commands him to get up, and he does. And so there we see Jesus, before he himself rises from the dead, he's already showing that he's got power over death while he is in his earthly ministry. Pretty cool. Really cool story there. We're going to be looking at some more really cool stuff tonight, and as we continue studying some of the miracles of Jesus. Let's stand up real quick. If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. If you're happy and you know it, then your face is sure to show it. If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. If you're happy and you know it, stomp your feet. If you're happy and you know it, stomp your feet. If you're happy and you know it, then your face will surely show it. If you're happy and you know it, stomp your feet. If you're happy and you know it, tweak your beak, tweak, tweak. If you're happy and you know it, tweak your beak, tweak, tweak. If you're happy and you know it, then your face will surely show it. If you're happy and you know it, tweak your beak, tweak, tweak. If you're happy and you know it, do the fawns, hey. If you're happy and you know it, do the fawns, hey. If you're happy and you know it, then your face will surely show it. If you're happy and you know it, do the fawns, hey. If you're happy and you know it, do the Hulk smash, Hulk smash! If you're happy and you know it, do the Hulk smash, Hulk smash! If you're happy and you know it, then your face will surely show it. If you're happy and you know it, do the Hulk smash, Hulk smash! See if we can, if you're happy and you know it, do the Superman. If you're happy and you know it, do the Superman. If you're happy and you know it, then your face will surely show it. If you're happy and you know it, do the Superman. I guess it's this one hand out, right? Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's one hand out. If you're happy and you know it, do the Batman. I'm Batman. If you're happy and you know it, do the Batman. I'm Batman. If you're happy and you know it, then your face will surely show it. If you're happy and you know it, do the Batman. I'm Batman. Now let's see if we can remember them all in order and just do them one time. If you're happy and you know it, do them all. Tweet, tweet. What was next? Hey. Hulk smash! Ooh. I'm Batman. And your face will surely show it. All right? Okay, let's all sit down real quick. About once a month, something like that, we're going to go through the books of the Bible. We're going to do that tonight really quickly. How many books in all? Shout it out. 66. How many in the Old Testament? 39. Let's say them. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth. 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, Job. Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, Daniel, Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi. How many books in the New Testament? 27. Let's sing them. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Acts and the letter to the Romans. 1st and 2nd Corinthians. Galatians and Ephesians. Philippians, Colossians. 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. 1st and 2nd Timothy. Titus and Philemon. Hebrews, James. 1st and 2nd Peter. 1st and 2nd and 3rd John. Jude and Revelation. All right. Sawyer, how many in the whole Bible? 66. That's right. All right. Thank you all for being here. At this time, we will dismiss to our classes.
Well, I'm not sure if Brittany and I were smart or dumb today, but we scheduled fillings for all 3 children at 8 o'clock this morning in Pulaski. We had to get them up, get them over there. And somehow we scheduled them all for eye appointments at 2 o'clock today. Brittany had something to go to at some point. I thought we did pretty well with all of that. You know, it was weird taking Chapman and Reese to school late and then picking them up early, you know. But we did it. But in the process, I do have video of Ford, a very loopy Ford. And so if you'd like to see that, I'll show it to you afterwards because it's pretty awesome, okay? But he managed to chew the fire out of his lip right here. And this thing is swollen and white. So if any of y'all got some home remedies or something to help, it may just be, basically the solution is stop chewing your lip, you know, and let it get better. I don't know if he's gonna pull that off or not. So anyway, he is home right now with his mama. Okay, let's get into it as we've been doing with all of these. We're going to start with a few factoids, which, you know, these are things that are commonly believed to be true. They've been repeated so often and said so often that, you know, folks are like, well, that's definitely a fact, and then we find out that in fact it is not a fact. Okay. So there's this long sort of running myth that camels store water in their humps. Perhaps you've heard that. Perhaps you grew up thinking that. You're like, that's what they're for. They got water in them, you know. In point of fact, they do not have water in them per se. It's just good old fat. But so you're like, well, what's the deal, you know, these camels can go pretty far with seemingly minimal water, all that. We learned it's actually their blood cells. Their cells are quite elastic and are able to kind of store more water than your average animal. So, you know, kids, somewhere along the way, you know, we hear this. And all of them tonight are factoids about animals, so there's that. If there's one thing everybody knows about baby birds is that you're not supposed to pick them up. And why are you not supposed to pick them up? Because the mother bird will smell the residue of stinky human hands and leave the little chick to just die on its own. Maybe you heard that. Don't touch it because, you know, the baby bird's mama will smell, you know, this human scent, and they will reject the bird. If you've heard that, if you've thought that, that's absolutely false. Number one, birds don't have the best sense of smell. Okay, so don't expect them to go, oh, that is definitely Homo sapien right there. You are anathema now, baby bird. The second little thing to kind of keep in mind is that most bird parents are quite devoted to their young, and it's going to take a lot more than that to deter them from taking care of their little baby birds. Okay, here's a third one. How many of you associate wolves with howling at the moon? Right? This right here is a kind of a common image. Go out west, and maybe pick you up, a lot of Native American shirts have one on them. They'll have a wolf, maybe a big moon in the background, something like that. And so, you know, there's kind of this myth that wolves only howl at the moon, or they howl at the moon, or something like that. Like the moon pulls a howl out of them, you know. Contrary to popular belief, is not the deal. I did get a little interested in this. Its origins can perhaps be traced back to ancient Greek and Roman cultures. The Greek goddess Hecate, I believe it's how we say it, is associated with both the moon and dogs. The Roman goddess Diana was similarly portrayed. In Norse mythology, I'm getting a lot of feedback up here, guys. I don't know if it's this or I don't know. Anyway, so in Norse mythology, a pair of wolves devours the moon to turn the night into day. That's kind of interesting. And wolves, as we mentioned, are also frequently pictured with the moon in Native American art. But here's, and then there's the other thing about werewolves. Like the moon, a full moon turns the human being into a werewolf. So this is something that's and then there's scary movies where they like to play up the wolves and the moon and stuff. But here's the thing: wolves are nocturnal animals. They do a lot of stuff at nighttime, and they use the howl maybe to gather their fellow wolves for some hunting, or maybe they howl to push rival gangs away, something like that. And by the way, a wolf can also bark and whimper. They don't just howl. And but here's the thing: wolves can howl in the daytime just as much as they can howl in the nighttime. But there's just this tendency for us to hear something a lot or to see it depicted a lot, and it just becomes so commonplace that we just make these associations in our mind, and we take them as gospel truth, and then somebody throws a big old bucket of cold water on it and says, "I'm sorry, that's not the deal." And something we've been saying along the way is sometimes people believe things that aren't true, and sometimes those people are you and me. And while, the whole wolf-moon connection is not really a big deal in the grand scheme of things. I mean, if I didn't come up with that factoid tonight and you walked out of here still linking moons and wolf howls together, you're going to be okay, But some of the other things that we've been talking about are, I think, a little bit more consequential, okay? Because of some of the things they can leave people thinking about God or about ourselves or about life, things like that. And so tonight I want us to look at another one of these, contrary to popular belief deals. Last week we looked at the whole concept, everything happens for a reason. That's kind of common around perhaps times of suffering. And what's interesting is that, and as I've looked into some of this more, there's just a lot of interesting things that get said over and over and over again in the context of suffering, in the face of death. And we're going to, next week I've just about decided to deal with some of those things that are said relative to the afterlife. Like how many times, and by the way, it happened to me today, you're at a funeral and somebody says something like this: so-and-so is looking down on y'all right now. I've heard that so many times. The question is that true? And what do we mean by that? How far does that go? How often can they see what we're doing? What are we saying here? And there's other things. You've heard people say stuff like, well, God just got another angel, as if this human being that passed away then gets transformed into an angel and now is, before the throne of God, having been transformed into an angel. It's like that. A lot of these things come out in times of grief and suffering. And the one we're going to look at today is kind of no different as far as the context of it, and it's this one. How many times have you heard or said, maybe it's in a moment of someone offering you comfort or are you trying to offer comfort to somebody, and we make the statement, God won't give you more than you can handle? Or we might put it a little differently. We might kind of go a little more passive, and we might say something like, God won't allow you to suffer more than you can bear. There's a limit, to that. So often when someone is in the throes of sorrow or suffering, somebody makes this claim about God. You see how you see this as a claim about what God won't do. Okay, God won't give you more than you can handle. I want to give just a couple of observations from the outset about this, and then we're going to answer kind of the same three questions we sought to answer last week relative to everything happens for a reason. But here's the first thing. First, this claim, as it is worded here, okay, implies that whatever difficult or painful things are happening in your life, God gave them to you. You see that? God won't give you more than you can handle. So who's the one giving? According to the way this is stated, it's God that's given you this pain. It's God that's given you this difficult circumstance. It's God that's given you this problem. Okay? And here's the thing. While I can't dismiss that, maybe sometimes God uses adversity to discipline us. I'm trying to do right by Hebrews 12, okay, where God wanting us to become more holy, there's this idea of discipline or chastisement, even though we have to admit at times we're kind of in the dark on whether or not what's happening to us is in fact God's chastisement. But even allowing for that, I'm not at all comfortable making the claim, and this is where it overlaps with last week, that everything that happens to us because God did it to us. Do y'all see how that can quickly get disturbing? Right? I mean, there's some horrible things that happen that I am not going to lay at the feet of God and say, God's the one who made that happen. God directly or actively caused that. Okay? And so that's a one little thing we could perhaps say. But having said that, recall that the way some people may state this, they say God won't allow, right? God won't permit you to suffer more than you can bear. And that kind of takes the onus off God a little bit as the agent of the suffering or pain. But it's still saying something about the fact that God's going to intervene or not permit you to have to deal with more than you can handle on your own. Okay? Here's kind of a second thing to consider. This saying strikes, I think, a note of fairness, maybe that we instinctively like. And this kind of overlaps with something we talked about in the very first contrary to popular belief lesson where we discussed the issue of fairness. But, there's something pleasing, I guess, about the idea that, the scales are in balance and God has assessed what we can handle and permits trials and suffering accordingly. Does everybody see what we're saying? In other words, the distribution of suffering that we see in the world, we see this person having to deal with a lot. Can I give you an example that will sit with you, Michael Mashburn? So we go, that guy, he's had to deal with a lot.
And then me or someone else you know hadn't had to deal with much. So what are we saying? Are we saying, well, the reason why Michael has had to suffer so much is because God knew he could handle it, so God just poured it on him? Or God allowed it to happen to him because he knew Michael could handle it. But the reason why you and I haven't suffered to that extent or as seriously as maybe some others have, the reason that hadn't happened to us is because God knows we're kind of weak and we couldn't handle that suffering if he were to send it our way. So I guess life is fair after all, right? What about Job? You think Job was like, yeah, bring it on. I can handle every bit of this, having no problem dealing with this at all. It's kind of like this. Everyone who can handle intense suffering will suffer intensely, and everyone who cannot handle intense suffering doesn't have to worry about dealing with intense suffering. And I think all of us, if we're honest with ourselves, can probably think of some counterexamples. But I'm going to shelve that for just the moment. Let's get into the three questions that we started kind of looking at last week. The first question is, okay, where does this come from? Where does this come from? Okay? I mean, it's been said by many people for a long time, so it came from somewhere. And I have an idea where it came from. And we're going to look at that. Then I want us to look at where this statement goes wrong. And then the third thing I want to do is what's the truth? Okay? What's the truth? All right, so here's the first thing. Where does this go wrong? Do you guys remember watching Snow White as a child? The cartoon Snow White? I think the most memorable line in the movie is, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all?" What if I told you that isn't actually what the Queen says in the movie? I mean, when I hear "mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all," I go, you nailed it. You got it word for word. But you know what she actually says? She actually says, "Magic mirror on the wall, who's the fairest one of all?" Now, to be fair, those two statements still get at the same thing. I mean, they're both saying the same thing. I mean, one says mirror, mirror, one says magic mirror, one says fairest of them all, one says fairest one of all. Okay, both getting at the same thing. But I want you to notice, okay, there are different words kind of being used there. And here's the thing. I would argue that the claim, "God won't give you more than you can handle," which is exclusively, I would say, used in the context of trials and tribulations and suffering and pain and stuff like that, okay? I'd say that's based on a misquote of a particular verse in the Bible. Except in this case, the misquote is misleading. All right, so where is that misquote? Well, it's coming from 1 Corinthians 10:13. That's where it's coming from. This whole thought, God won't give you more than you can handle, it's coming from 1 Corinthians 10 and verse 13, but it's an application of the text that's misleading. And let me explain this, okay? Look at what the text actually says. "No temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability, but with the temptation, he will also provide the way of escape that you may be able to endure it." Now let me highlight where I think some things have gone kind of a little awry here. To be fair to those that are going to make their case in 1 Corinthians 10:13. The words I have highlighted here in yellow, temptation, tempted, and then temptation again. The Greek word there, depending on the context, can mean trials or it can mean temptation. It can refer to, the concept of being tempted to sin, or it can deal with the concept of suffering. Now, how you're going to know what this word is referring to in a given passage is you've got to look at what? You've got to look at the context, okay? And so when we look at the context, go ahead and turn in your Bibles there to 1 Corinthians chapter 10, okay? And let me show you this, okay? Some of you that maybe have studied 1 Corinthians before are aware that in this particular chapter, Paul is taking them back to the wilderness generation. And you'll see in chapter 10, verse 6, and then I want you to look down there in verse 11. I want you to look at this. Verse 6 says, "Now these things took place as examples for us, that we might not desire evil as they did." And then verse 11, "Now these things happened to them as an example." So in the context where we get to verse 13, what we have here is Paul's going to talk about that wilderness generation, and in point of fact, how they succumbed to temptation and sinned in various points. And then Paul's going to kind of make application of that. So just look at some of the sins that Paul highlights here. Verse 7, Paul highlights, as you can see, idolatry, right? And then he hearkens them back to that unbelievable moment, right, where they worship the golden calf. Okay?
And then he brings up in verse,
Verse 8, the concept of sexual immorality. So he's had idolatry and he's had sexual immorality. Okay? So the sexual morality, he's thinking back to an incident with Balaam and the king of Moab and the Moabitesses, and there was some rampant sexuality going on, and 23,000 people died in one day as a result of that rebellion and sin, given into that temptation. Brings up this concept of putting Christ to the test, which is an interesting study in its own right. But there is all throughout if you go back and read the Wilderness Wonder, which, by the way, shameless plug, that's going to be the theme of our VBS in about a month or so. But so often you read through there, do not put the Lord your God to what? To test. And they tested him all the time. And then the last thing that's mentioned here is grumbling. Did the wilderness generation know how to grumble? Did they know how to complain? Did they give themselves over to that? Yes, they did. And so verse 11, "Now these things happened to them as an example, but they were written down for our instruction, on whom the end of the ages has come." Verse 12 is kind of, I think, addressed to the self-confident, right? "Therefore let anyone who thinks that he stands take heed lest he fall." It's like, hey, if you think you're above this, if you think you're Teflon, if you think you can't succumb to this, take heed, because you might just do so. And then verse 13 seems to be maybe addressed to the despondent. It's an encouragement here relative to sin, relative to temptation. Not encouraging to sin, but overcoming temptation. Look at what verse 13, "No temptation," that fits the context. "No temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability, but with the temptation he will also provide the way of escape, that you may be able to endure it." And just note, just quickly, verse 14, "Therefore, my beloved brothers," what? "Flee from idolatry." The context, guys, is not about the suffering that we face and, the pain and the difficulties of life, over which, frankly, we often don't have a choice, right? A lot of the suffering and the pain and the difficulties that come into our life isn't because we're like, I volunteer to undergo that. I mean, but we're talking about something we can attach to choice, and that is whether we're going to sin or not. That's the context here. And so what we're saying is, in point of fact, whenever, you are tempted to cheat, or you're tempted to steal, or you're tempted to commit adultery, or tempted to lie, or to hurt someone else, etc., we can never say, "Sorry, God, the temptation was just more than I could handle." Now, that's what verse 13 is saying. Verse 13 is saying, hey, you can overcome temptation. You don't have to succumb to temptation. Okay? You can rise above it. God's with you. God's faithful, right? He's going to provide a way of escape. Frankly, sometimes we don't want to take the way of escape, whatever that may look like or whatever that may entail. We just as soon give in to the sin, but this is a sobering passage. And it's comforting at the same time to know that I'm not just hopelessly going to have to just fall for one temptation after another. That sin's just going to constantly dominate me. And then we become forlorn and perhaps despondent. That's the focus of 1 Corinthians 10:13. But I would say this, whenever you're crumbling under the weight of blinding grief or clinical depression or some profound disappointment, I am saying this verse isn't instructing us to say, sorry, God, I can handle this all on my own. After all, you wouldn't have allowed this into my life if I couldn't have handled it. So, here we are. Let's talk about where it goes wrong, okay? One, it contradicts Scripture. This concept, God won't give you more than you can handle. And again, the context of that statement, interestingly enough, is hardly ever said in the context it should be said, and that is in the context of temptation, right? It's always said in the context of suffering, all right? In other words, when somebody is struggling to sin or not to sin, do we throw our arms around them and say, encourage them, God's not going to give you more than you can handle. You can overcome this. You can rise above this sin. No, we always use this statement when somebody's in the throes of grief and pain and sorrow and suffering, and God, you wouldn't be going through this if God didn't think you could handle it. And I'm saying we're misapplying Scripture when we use this in that context. And furthermore, how do you deal with this? 2 Corinthians 1:8. This is none other than the Apostle Paul. For we do not want you to be unaware, brothers, of the affliction we experienced in Asia, for we were so utterly burdened beyond our strength that we despaired of life itself. What did Paul just say here? Paul just said, we were afflicted beyond what we could what? Handle on our own. That's what he's saying here. By the way, have you read some of the stuff Paul's been through? And do you remind yourself that he is a human being? And that he had to deal with I tell you, of all the things probably that Paul dealt with that I don't know if I could have handled, well, there's a lot of it I couldn't have, but one of them is spending a night and a day out in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. Y'all know how many times I would probably have a heart attack when something nibbled on my toes, Just being alone out there. He dealt with a lot. And I just want you to see what I have in yellow. What is Paul saying? Paul is saying the exact opposite of what so many people say when they're trying to comfort somebody. And we're going to come back to verse 9 in just a second. But I also want to think in terms of experience here. I can think of a host of things that people have had to face that they couldn't handle on their own. Can I give you a list? Repeated sexual abuse. Rape. Major clinical depression and or anxiety. PTSD. You know anybody that's got PTSD? They needed any help? What about cancer? What about this one? The loss of a child. When somebody's experiencing one of these difficulties or tragedies, the statement that God won't give you more than you can handle actually minimizes the seriousness of the suffering. I don't know if you thought about it this way, but it's as if the suffering is downplayed a bit. It's as if we're saying, you've got this, it could be worse. It could be far worse if you were capable of enduring something worse. Oh, that's gross. And I know when we say this stuff, We probably don't mean it that way. We're just trying to find words to try to help them put one foot in front of the other. But this stuff's got some implications to it. And sometimes the person you say this to, that is what they are hearing. Suffering is complex, and it's difficult enough for us to understand it as it is without throwing in, I think, the unbiblical idea that God is somehow dishing suffering out to us on the basis of how resilient He perceives that we are. Here's a second thing. It creates unrealistic expectations. To some people, the claim that God won't give you more than you can handle means that God will protect them from all the really detrimental difficulties in life, like some of the ones I just mentioned. It's like God won't let me lose a child because I know I could never handle that. So God won't allow that to happen to me. By the way, is there any parent out there who thinks to themselves, I think God's going to allow me to lose a child because I think I could handle that pretty well? You think anybody says that? Thinks that? If I lost a child, you better help me, right? Because I ain't going to be able to handle that real well by myself. And God won't let me get terminal cancer. God won't let me suffer a mental illness or an emotional disorder. I couldn't handle those things, so I won't ever have to face those things. Do you guys see how this God won't give you more than you can handle can set people up for some really unrealistic expectations in a fallen world where really, really bad stuff can happen to you? Third thing, cultivates guilt and shame. Many folks who are suffering intensely in one way or another do feel like Paul that their suffering is beyond what they can bear. And for these individuals, hearing the message, God won't give you more than you can handle, can communicate that something is wrong with them or that something's wrong with their faith. When we struggle or we feel defeated or we become emotional and someone throws this line out there, God won't give you more than you can handle, what we may hear is, don't be so weak, Or somebody can get to thinking, well, I should be handling this better than I am. What's wrong with me? I shouldn't be struggling so much with this. After all, God's not going to give me more than I can handle. I should just be taking this in stride, And it's clear that this person said this to me because they think I'm not taking it in stride. And then, see, guilt and some shame and some doubt can start to creep in sometimes with folks that hear this. And then, finally, it coaxes people to turn inward rather than Godward. The saying, God will never give you more than you can handle, tells me that I have what it takes. Tells me that I can bear whatever comes my way. It tells me that God permits trials according to my ability to endure. And what happens is the statement kind of breeds this self-focused, self-reliant kind of thinking. Because it's like God's not going to give me more than I can handle. So what's the truth? As we close, I know the time's up. I got 3 of these, and the last one I like the most, but I've heard people put it this way: God won't give you more than He can handle. And that's with the understanding that I realize there is importance in me relying on God and His promises and His presence and so forth and so on. Another way that people put it is, God will meet you in the mess. That's good too. He doesn't abandon you, that life is going to happen to people. And that's the thing about suffering. Makes it sometimes inscrutable, is its distribution, and it's sometimes gratuitous and unfair. but God doesn't leave us. Here's a good way. God will help you handle all that you have been given. What I like about this is it doesn't suggest that God's out there just dishing out suffering. All right, Joe, you got this meter right here, so let's dish some suffering out to about this point, you know. Let's really test you and see if my perception of your resilience is as I thought it was, or something like that. 3 passages as we close that I think undergird this right here, okay? The truth that Scripture speaks. First one comes from 2 Corinthians 1:9. I read to you 2 Corinthians 1:8, where Paul says that it was beyond more that I could what? Than I could endure or that I could bear, whatever. Here's what he said in the very next verse. Indeed, we felt that we had received the sentence of death, but that was to make us rely not on ourselves, but on God who raises the dead. I love 2 Corinthians 1:9. Because I'll tell you, something that nobody can handle. You know, I mean, let's face it, all of us are eventually going to get something our bodies can't handle, right? At some point, you're going to come up against something, unless Christ returns first, that's going to put you in the ground. I'm going to put my trust in a God who is so powerful that he can raise me from the dead. And that kind of power, I can lean on that no matter what I'm dealing with in this life. Another passage, 1 Peter 5:6 and 7. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that at the proper time he may exalt you. And then here's an example of how we humble ourselves. Here's an example of how we rely on him. Here's an example of how we depend on him, rather than being self-reliant and self-focused. Casting all your anxieties on him. Why? Because he cares for you. It's going to take faith, and it's going to take trust and acting on that. One more passage. I've got a question for you. David wrote 73 Psalms. Do you think David ever thought he'd come up against something he couldn't handle by himself? The Psalms drip with this. Why do you think he wrote so many Psalms? Because he realized this is more than I can bear on my own. And so all throughout the Psalms, you'll see statements like this. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. So maybe instead of saying, God won't give you more than you can handle, say something like, hey, God is with you, God cares for you, and God will be with you through all of this. And maybe we can add this. This is really good too. And I will be here too. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your word. We thank you for its promises. We thank you for all that it has to say about you and what it reveals about you. And we know you love us. We know that you're concerned about us. We know that you care for us. We know that you hurt with us. We know that you have suffered and that you know it experientially because of your Son. And we pray that we will never lose sight of the God that you are, and that we will be careful and not to say things to people or to make claims about you that you never made about yourself. We ask all these things in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen. All right, go ahead and get your kiddos. Appreciate your attention tonight.